Hello and welcome to this quick guide where I'm going to have a quick look at changing the voxels in a voxel mesh at runtime in your games in Crayta. So there's a few different function calls we can do to change what voxels are in your voxel mesh. The first and the most simplest is to just do self-getEntity.mesh on a script that's attached to a voxel mesh. You can use this to essentially change the voxel mesh just like you can in the entity editor here, where you've got this drop down and you can choose a different voxel mesh. You can change it at runtime by giving it a voxel mesh asset to change it into. So you can see up here, that property is referring to this property here, which is a voxel mesh asset. And if I scroll down to that script attached to that entity, I can choose what mesh I want to change it to, whether it's the current one or some other ones. I've got this other voxel mesh asset, which is essentially the exact same thing as this one, except it's a meadow. And so if I test that, we can see that I can change it into a meadow at runtime. An alternative to that would be to change an individual voxel. Rather than changing the entire mesh to a completely different mesh, I can keep the same mesh, but I can change an individual voxel within that mesh by running this function with setVoxel and then supplying a position and the type of voxel I want to change it to. Here I'm using an array of 6 different voxels, and I'm just looping through that array, and each time 1.5 seconds passes, I'm changing what voxel within that array I'm passing to it. So we can see that in action, and you can see that it's just changing this one voxel in the corner here, and it's looping through a few different types of grass every 1.5 seconds. Another way of changing voxels at runtime is to use the getEntity setVoxelBox function, which will essentially do the same thing as drawing a box of voxels in your game world using the box tool here. When we use this function, again, we pass it a position first. For the second argument, you can either pass a vector, which will supply the dimensions of the box you want to draw in length, width, and height, or you can give it a number, just a single number, and that will draw a cube where that number is half the width, half the length, and half the height. The last argument is always going to be the voxel type again. So let's have a look at what happens when I run this function. We can see that we're drawing a cuboid. There's lots of great ways of using this kind of coding in your games in Crayta. For example, you could create a weapon which shoots wallpaper. You could create a weapon which shoots bridges. You can add crafting. You can change race so that the obstacles change every few seconds or every 30 seconds, or depending on what day you visit the race. You can age crops, you can change the seasons, you can do loads of different things just by changing the types of voxels. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how you use this in Crayta.